Hello and welcome back to the channel. Another interesting video here today, and boy, they're gonna come for me for this one. So today I want to talk a bit about Spider-Man, Miles Morales. Um, this is a video I've been thinking about for quite some time, right? Following the surge of the Into the Spider-Verse film franchise, as well as Spider-Man 2, and this recent push for Miles Morales to sort of take over the spotlight from Peter Parker, right? I think we've all seen it or recognized that there's this push for for Miles to be in the public sphere, and that got me thinking as to why that was happening, and I wanted to have a discussion about it. And like most of you, I grew up watching Peter Parker as Spider-Man. I'm not Miles, so for the purposes of this video, I've tried to do research to try to understand Miles a bit more, and I have to say, the more I learn about the character, the more I dislike the character, and I do not understand how anyone, particularly if you are black, I do not understand how you would like this character. Now, I say that because Miles is a walking stereotype, right? All the and not the good kind, right? Not the good kind, like all Asians are good at kung fu. It's the worst stereotypes that you can think of. All those labels that are have been attached to the black people over the years. That's the worst stereotypes that they've attached to Miles, and I don't understand how anyone could see this and not not find it offensive, not find the character himself to be offensive, right? So, before we get into the stereotypes, let's step back a bit and examine the arguments for or the case for Miles as a character. Right, over the years, we've had a lot of this discussion, and people who have come out in defense of the character and made arguments for why Miles is needed. The most prominent, response that we've seen, repeated ad nauseum is inclusivity. Right, Miles is necessary for inclusivity. Now, I've done a video on the channel about the problem with BEI. So if you're interested in having a more in-depth conversation, you can check that out. I won't spend too much time going over all the points from that video, but in response to that case for Miles, inclusivity, my response there would simply be no one is entitled to representation. You are not entitled to representation, nor am I. No one is entitled to representation. The public simply wants or desires good stories. That's what it boils down to. So I've never found that to be a very compelling argument. We're simply just creating these characters for the sake of inclusivity. That is absurd, and not a valid reason. Now, there's certainly a conversation we could have about representation, all right? Um, and people wanting to see others who look like them represented on screen. That is understandable more so on a human level than anything, right? And I've often seen the argument that that people have made saying they don't need that race isn't important, right? And I think that is a bit of a coping mechanism, right? Because I think everyone, including whether you're white, black, Asian, whatever, everyone wants to see someone like them in stories that they consume. That is just a part of the human condition. The human mind is a pattern recognition machine, and we gravitate towards things that are familiar, right? It's why even criminals end up in gangs, or um, a horrible example to choose, but albeit an extreme one, it illustrates the point, right? We typically gravitate more towards people who share a similar belief system, or think the same way that we do, right? Likewise, the same goes for how you appear. Obviously, when you meet people, the first thing that that you're faced with is their outward appearance, right? And so you tend to gravitate towards these stories that resemble you more often than not. So that is just a part of the human condition. Now, do I believe that should be the priority? No, of course not. No, I don't. Right? I think the aim should always be to tell stories that are universal in the themes that they explore, which which can be enjoyed by anyone, regardless of the race. Uh, but the race factor is still an element that, albeit subconscious, it is still there, right? And so that from that perspective, I do understand why people may say, okay, we want to see someone that resembles us to some extent. Now, the question then becomes: is this what you want to be that representation, Miles Morales, right? That is a low bar in my mind. That is a very low bar in my mind, right? And you know, yeah, it's a terrible choice, right? Because again, we've seen a lot of these similar race swaps happen over the course of the years, and it's understandable why fans would be somewhat frustrated with it. Right, we've seen it happen with the Green Lanterns with John Stewart, and it isn't that people don't like John as a character; they do, but often what we've seen happen is that they will borrow elements from Hal Jordan's background and give that to John Stewart, and that of course will frustrate people because why are you doing that? And the Bat Family, we've seen it happen there. It's well, not just a race thing, but then they'll introduce all these new characters like Batgirl, and then stories where she's disabled, so they can check their disability box along with the we have a woman on the team now box. It's all these boxes that are being checked for diversity's sake, not with the intention of telling a good story, right? And I think Lucius Fox, he has a son at some point who does build a sort of a Iron Man suit that resembles the bat. So he took on a mantle at one point, and and this is unrelated, but I'll just say it because I find it hilarious that we've checked all these boxes with the Bat Family to include Asians, women, disabled people, all these boxes that we've checked for the Bat Family. And the Bat Family has grown over the years, and yet Gotham is still a shithole, right? And it underscores how these decisions, how little thought is placed into making these decisions, right? Because you're so preoccupied with checking all these boxes, you don't ask, does this actually make sense for the story? If there are this many vigilantes in Gotham and Gotham still sucks, then I'd argue the problem may lie with the vigilantes, right? Or if they're doing such a piss poor job, then they really should take up a different occupation. They may actually be doing more harm than good, right? But yeah, why would you want Miles Morales to be the representation for that? And he's in my mind, he's just a copy, and in some ways, he's a copy of Static Shock that they're trying to imprint onto Spider-Man, which is strange. People might say that his power set is very um different from Peter's, and I I don't really see it, right? It's still pulling from a subset of the Spider family. I believe the Linafide family of spiders who use static electricity to float, sort of like Magneto does. It's called ballooning, right? So he's really yeah, and they use it to enhance the webbing so that they can attract positively charged prey, right? So it's easier for them to catch food. So it's still spider powers. They're just pulling from a different family of spiders to give him that power set, and then they just exaggerate it. So his power set's really, it's not different. He's still a spider, or still utilizing spider powers. Um, he's and I guess we come back to the stereotype discussion because his outfits are they're just ridiculous. And I'm sure it varies over the course of the years that he's been in print, but a lot of them don't make any sense in terms of how practical they are, right? And someone on the team decided that having Spider-Man, and this is why I said, the stereotypes, it's just absurd, and I don't know, understand how people would like this, because the idea that, black people like sneakers, so we need to give this character a signature look where he's wearing sneakers, or um, that hairstyle that in some suits that he has pops out of um, his up top out of his costume, which again, all these things just don't make sense, right? If as a vigilante, you need to remain anonymous. Why would you wear these signature sneakers that someone can use to trace back to the character? And why would your hair be exposed? Because then someone automatically knows that that Spider-Man is actually black because of his hair. It just makes no sense whatsoever. And it's again, someone in the design room felt that this Spider-Man needed to have some urban flair to him, right? And look like he's from a hip hop video. And even with the Into the Spider Verse promotion, it was very evident that that's what they were going for, right? This very showy Spider Man, which makes no sense for the character. When Peter designed his suit, it was very practical, right? His first suit was just a hoodie and so on, and then he kind of upgraded that. He needed something that he could tuck under his clothing so that he could change out into his Spider-Man outfit relatively quickly, and then swap back in and hide it in his backpack if necessary. Um, he needed something to be able to move around in quite easily. It was all very practical. Whereas for Miles, someone just decided we need to sell these black kids clothes and sneakers. That's it. And so I don't understand how you would not be offended by this, right? And then we get to the backstory of the character, and I had to chuckle as I read this because as I read it, it said, okay, the when they developed Peter Parker's Spider-Man, Peter was a very intelligent young man. He was a genius, right? All right, we can't retread that ground, so we need Miles to not be smart. We need Miles to not be intelligent. So we're just gonna make him ordinary. He's just an ordinary guy. So right then and there, they're already saying, okay, black people stupid, right? So I don't understand it, man. I don't. Um, so all right, we can't make him intelligent like Peter, so we're gonna go the opposite direction. All right, and next we need to give him some motivation. We can't do the Uncle Ben thing. Uncle Ben, an upstanding man who did right by his family to provide for them and provide his son with these moral virtues to help him survive, carry forward as a man, right? We can't do that with Miles, so we're gonna make his uncle a criminal, right? So right off the bat, we have, yeah, we can't make the we can't make the black characters intelligent. We need them to buy into this obsession with sneakers and hip hop, look and appearance, and they must have a criminal in the family, right? How do you read this and not be offended by this, right? Miles, as a character, he's just, and I don't know, even if you put that aside, right? A lot of the obstacles that he comes across trying to balance school life and personal life and all of that. This is just a retread of Peter Parker's story, and they try to, in many instances, make Peter a mentor figure for him, to sort of balance that out. But the reality is, we've all experienced Peter growing up already, and we're just retreading the same ground now with a character of a different shade, and that's effectively what it is, right? The Spider-Man 2 game certainly took it in a different direction, with the deaf girlfriend. Again, just checking another box right there. Yeah, very interesting. Um, well, I thought to myself, right, on DC's side, that they actually unironically created a very interesting Spider-Man character, in the Static Shock animated series, because this character stuck with me, and when I thought, how could they actually do a unique Spider-Man character, he came to mind. Um, I think his name was Anansi, or it may have been Brother Anansi, or something Anansi, alluding to the um, West African folklore, mythological character, trickster god, Anansi, right? And they did an interesting take in the series for him where his abilities were because Anansi is a trickster god and he uses deceit and a web of lies and stuff like that. They gave him illusionary powers, right, to deceive people.
Hit him with a web blast!
I am not that kind of spider. And this is not that kind of web.
And rather than having him wall crawl like Spider-Man does, I guess he manipulates the area he's in some ways so that he can walk upside down or walk at different angles. So he doesn't crawl, he just runs at ridiculous angles.
After him!
Okay, that's kind of cool.
And so on. So that was it. That was an interesting take, rather than this lazy the direction that we've taken with Miles as a character. So it is. I don't know. I think there are better ways that they could have gone about this, or just not create a brown Spider-Man. And what is really the point of that, right? Try to create an original character. It's been done before. Yeah, Spawn, Blade, and so on. And the Anansi character that I just described. There, there, there are ways to do it. Um, and I think the first way to do that is to lose all these labels that and stereotypes that they're attaching to a lot of these characters, because you are being used, right? These corporations are just using all these stereotypes to try to sell you things and keep that the same degenerate shit that gets highlighted in the black community often. That is what they keep pushing, and that is what they're using Miles for, as a prop. They keep pushing the same degenerate shit, right? This there are ways to do it that is, this is not it. This is not it. Um, yeah. So the first instance, if you desire to change and do that, is to not fall for this, not fall for these characters that they just create to keep the cycle going, right? There are I don't know. It's tricky because I understand it's difficult to create a new character now, because from a company perspective, it's a lot less risky for them to take an existing IP and try to mold that into something that they want. Um, because again, it's a risk to create a new character, and if it doesn't hit, then it's a financial risk. But if you're a creator, um, that should not be your priority, right? If your aim is to create new characters, you can't be thinking like a business, and worried about what the financial impact is. You just have to try to tell a good story first and foremost, um, and that will gravitate people will gravitate more towards towards those characters, and the passion that you have put into writing those characters. So I have, you know, I've mostly enjoyed the things that Ryan Coogler has put out, for an example, and I bring him up because I think at least the last few films that he has done is it's really a good example of how to create these interesting characters, right? Sinners is one that is now currently in the public sphere, with the Oscar talks and so on. I don't believe that film is a masterpiece. It's not, but it is an entertaining. It's a good and entertaining movie. But he does introduce within that film, the Smokestack twins, who are interesting characters, right? Um, and that's how you go about doing it. Just try to create an interesting story that will resonate with people or stick with them and are memorable. You know, and so I have some appreciation for him for at least going that route, and trying to create some interesting characters rather than trying to just rehash a pre-existing character. Obviously, some people have said that Sinners was Blade that he couldn't get to do, so he just did his version of Blade, and so on. But these characters, at least for the most part of the film, they weren't vampires, right? The two brothers aren't vampires, but yeah, but it's just to highlight that that's the best way to go about creating an interesting character that you that you want the public to resonate with. Let's create a good story, and if the character happens to be black, then great. But that should not be your immediate priority, right? There's a long way to go for before we see a lot of change here, because as I've spoken about this before in that video that I referenced earlier for, the problem with DEI. The problem is largely a cultural one, and until we address that first, it's going to be increasingly difficult to really truly write good characters. Um, and another part of the problem is, just creatively, we seem to be stuck in a rut when it comes to creating new characters. For example, you rarely see whenever there's a new series or a movie, somehow it always appears to either be in the 1980s, 70s or 80s, or if it's something that takes place in the future, it's somewhere in the 2000s, right? 2020 something, right? Blade Runner 2045 and so on. We're not there's this huge gap in human history that no one appears to be trying to explore, right? There are no stories that are taking place in the 90s or in the early 2000s. We have decades that that's just a blank in our stories for some odd reason, right? The stories always take place in the 80s or 70s whenever they're told, or before, but never in the 90s or the early 2000s for some odd reason. And for the future, no one seems to be trying to tell futuristic stories. We're not dreaming of the future, for some reason, right? And so we're kind of limiting ourselves in the kind of characters that we can create and stories that we can tell. And so I would say, for those within the Black community, I say Black community because, as I've said, there's no such thing as a Black community, right? We're not a monolith, and I do believe that is one of the things that is a hindrance to the creative process when it comes to writing Black characters, because there's always this need to write a story or create a character that is pleasing everyone in this community, in this imagined community, when in truth there is no Black community. You cannot travel to Asia and possibly tell a Japanese man and an Asian man that they are the same, or they need to relate to each other. They may find common ground somewhere, but they do not believe that simply because they're Asian, that means that they are the same. They are not. And likewise, you're not required to create a Black character that must serve, or please every Black person over the entire planet. All right, you are limiting your creativity by attempting to do this. So that's the other problem, right? This need to create a character that that speaks to one particular demographic versus just telling a universal story, or examining this victimhood narrative that Hollywood wants you to keep pandering to, right? You are in an era where you have the freedom to create, memorable and interesting characters. So take the opportunity and write it, right? And as I've said, the cultural part of the problem needs to be addressed, because rather than having your kid waste the money on Jordans or something, get them involved in the creative process. I've said before, the motto of the channel is stories influence the culture, and the culture is a reflection of our stories. So you know get your kids interested in the creative process, right? Don't wait for someone else to race swap a character or to tell a story on your behalf. Tell the story yourself. That's the only way this gets addressed, and done in a meaningful way that people of all races would resonate with it, right? So that is that is my take on Miles Morales as a character. I don't particularly care for him. I, partly understand the need for, or why people are craving, a character that resembles them in some way on the big screen. I think that is important for some, or for all, really. Uh, But I do not believe the way to do that is to race swap these pre-existing characters. I think there's just too much history that's available for you to tell your own story to ignore and then spend time trying to rewrite these characters. You just create a character of your own. It is possible, it can be done. You just need to focus on the correct thing, focus on the right thing, and we can definitely get there. So I'm sure I'm gonna get a lot of pushback on this one, particularly the people of this generation who have become more familiar with Miles because he's just been pushed in the media so much. But we need to recognize that this character is, by definition, he is just a prop that's been used to sell you a particular narrative. Every story that, or the majority of the stories that you come across with Miles, it's pushing that same victimhood narrative, where we need to retread these discussions about slavery and whatever. We've moved past that. It's time to move on. It's not worth discussing. And there are far more interesting things and far more interesting stories and far more interesting characters that you can create with themes that are universal that anyone can really enjoy. Don't fall for the bait with characters like this that are defined by identity politics, because that is what Miles as a character is, right? And we need to just move on from that. Move on from those characters. All right, that is it. Thank you very much for stopping by. I will see you all next time.